The ugly side of the beautiful game, why football is still struggling to kick out racism. And the world's biggest sport is loved on the planet's biggest continent. So why do so few Asian players make it to the top? I'm Martin Stanford. This is Insight. Welcome to Insight. Football may be called the beautiful game, but it has a very ugly side. Despite long-standing campaigns, the racist abuse of players by fans is far from a thing of the past. Next year, Russia will host the World Cup, where the most recent available figures suggest the number of racist incidents at domestic games is still on the rise. Insight's Ty Genwright reports.
Full time in the Serbian capital Belgrade, and one player has had enough. Everton Lewis joined the team Partizan last year. After this game in February, he was reduced to tears, complaining that some rival fans made monkey chants throughout. Incidents such as this are thankfully rare, but demonstrate how the ugly shadow of racism has not been lifted from football. It's more than 40 years since Luther Blissett became one of the first black players to represent England. You broke boundaries. How have things changed for those playing today?
When I started playing, it wasn't quite so much as being looked upon as being racism that you were having to suffer. It was just the way things were. You know, the fact that you had a different colour or you're a different culture, you were just treated very different to everybody else. And you just had to get on with it.
So things have changed today, you think?
I think it's moved on a lot for the fact that you can report things now and there is an official place where you can take it.
So a process has been put in place now to try and stop racism, and there has been some progress, but what's your view as to what's still lacking?
There's a lot still lacking because we, like most things, we all adapt, it evolves, and whereas it was very outwardly racism that we'd come across when I first sort of started playing football and when I first came to England. Now, I think a lot of people are a little bit more cautious and they're a bit more aware that if they behave in a certain way, they can be branded a racist.
We've seen various campaigns put in place by various governing bodies around the world, and each country has its own problems. But the world governing body only really started addressing this a few years ago.
Yeah.
And then just recently FIFA said, job done, it's sorted.
We've been doing this since the early 80s, and FIFA has done it in 3 years. We have solved racism. Rubbish. They have not solved it. All they've done is shown that we now recognise that it does exist, because before that, it never existed for them, which is just unbelievable with some of the things that went on, but it's still there, and clubs are having to fight it week in, week out, with certain fractions that come to football, because it's a way that lots of people can get together and voice their disapproval of somebody of a different culture.
It's part of the problem, the culture that surrounds football. Generally, a lot of men who get together, drink and chant.
Yeah, it is. I mean, football being the tribalistic thing that it is, you know, players-wise as well as the people that support and follow it, it's a great place to turn up and shout, and they feel they can scream and shout whatever they like at those guys. But it does matter because they're people and they all have feelings. They all have lives, they all have families.
Football is and should be a family game, a sport that everyone can enjoy together. The issue of race and racism is a delicate one for those trying to inspire the next generation of players.
They're aware that one's got blue eyes, one's got black eyes, one's got blonde hair, etc. So they definitely are aware of race, but I don't think that they see it as being an issue.
We finish, well done. Play on, Josh, and we're going blue. Everybody ready?
Fast forward to young adulthood, and the problems are easier to see.
I have seen an improvement. You see a lot more people getting like lifetime bans and stuff like that.
I think also, I wouldn't say it's improved. I think it's more the people that actually are organising these sort of racist cults and things like that. They become more smarter. It's become more organised. Whereas back in the day when I was younger, it was more out there in the open. But now it's more hidden.
social media
It's more
and stuff
hidden.
like
It's
that.
more sort of targeted specific things rather than being general.
Kids really look up to the big players, don't they? Is there more you think they could be doing to act as better role models against racism?
Football is such a big platform in the world. I think they can do a lot to change it. They've got a campaign, No to Racism, where different players from all over the world are just saying no to racism. I think even though it's such a small thing, it's 3 words that a famous football player is saying, but it can do so much to kids.
I think footballers can do a lot more than they do. Maybe footballers coming down into communities and doing stuff like playing with kids from like different cultures and backgrounds and stuff like that would improve like the community itself and then go along worldwide.
So it should be up to the stars themselves.
Yeah, because I think they hold a lot of weight. Like literally, kids will say, "Ronaldo, did you see his new car? Or did you see what he done with his son?" The way that footballers nowadays as well, they have so much power, especially like with the kids and even the older boys. Like if they see a footballer now, they'll be absolutely gobsmacked and will do anything they say.
Love that. Love that.
Sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. That used to be the thing that people used to say to me all the time, but that is not actually true.
Luther has battled racism all his life, both on and now off the pitch.
Words are very cutting. It lasts a lifetime. I mean, I fractured my skull, knee, and I can't even remember what the pain is like for that.
But you remember the other pain.
You definitely remember the other pain.
And his is a lesson that black players today are still learning. Ty Genright reporting for Insight.
Well, to discuss that further, I'm joined now by Anwar Uddin, who's a former professional footballer. He currently spearheads the Fans for Diversity campaign. That's an initiative run in partnership by Kick It Out and the Football Supporters Federation. Thanks for being with us, Anwar.
No problem.
Why are you still having to do this?
It still exists. It's still prominent in society, and I think society reflects football. So there's a job to do, and organisations like Kick It Out, Show Racism, the Red Card, the Football Supporters Federation are in place to try and combat that and improve football as a whole.
But would I be right in saying football is lagging behind society as a whole, where I get the impression racism is disapproved of, is by and large stamped out? Football seems to be an island all of its own.
I think there are definite incidents that highlight there is still an issue within the game, but there are also loads of positives. You've got to think about the magnitude in which football is played in this country. In every city, every weekend, thousands upon thousands of people are watching a beautiful game. We love it in this country, we embrace it, but there are still incidents that, you know, are uncalled for, are wrong and are inappropriate. But they are reducing, but they still exist. So there are loads of positives, but it's really looking to highlight those negatives and making sure that when incidents do happen, they're dealt with appropriately.
And are they dealt with appropriately, in your view? Are the sanctions strong enough?
I think in recent times there have been some high-profile incidents when it comes to high-profile players, and we've seen sanctions like bans and fines, but I think there needs to be more of them across the board. If you're a Premier League player and do something wrong on Sky, everyone knows about it, but what about the League Two player? What about the player in a non-league who does the same thing? And because it's not as, you know, as profiled as the bigger game, I still think they should have the same punishment, because, you know, there is no flexibility when it comes to that. It's wrong and we don't need it in our game, and players need to be aware of that.
What is it about football fans, and I don't want to be sexist about this, but it tends to be mostly men, I would think are more likely to be the offenders, that they might be perfectly regular human beings in their job, with their family, talking to their kids. They have a pint or two and go to the game. They turn into a different kind of animal, don't they?
I think if you look about where we've come, the game 30 years ago was probably very male-dominated. It's changing, but it can't go from one extreme to the other very quickly.
It's taking its time.
There has to be a transition. So, yeah, 30 years ago, it was full of men going to the game, having a drink, chanting, singing, having a laugh. That's changing. We're seeing more family, more women, more children going to games. So it is in transition, but you still have the element of that, but that's what some people like to, that's what they choose to do and how they choose to support their team.
There are demographic differences too. I mean, although we're talking here in London, so the English game is not perfect. Continental Europe, the game got a few incidents going on, but as we go further east, and I'm looking ahead to Russia now, next year, World Cup, as we've heard in our report, there are a greater number of instances of this kind of behaviour in those countries, aren't there?
More definite. I mean, I don't ever like to compare two countries because it's like, you know, comparing an apple and a banana.
Sure.
It's very, very different. However, in this country, I think we are in a better place in comparison to the likes of Russia, for example, because incidents happens, they don't have the punishments, and it seems as though players they don't want to go and play football in those countries, and fans don't want to go and watch football in those countries because of the environment that exists in those countries, and they don't have the punishments. The organisations don't really back the importance of diversity and inclusion.
Well, this guy, Alexei Smertin, former player, not very well known to me, I'll cheerfully admit to you, but anyway, he's been appointed by Russia, hasn't he, to say, you've got to sort it out, and let's keep the World Cup an example to the whole globe of how it should be done. He's on record of saying, well, there isn't any racism in football. It just simply doesn't exist. Well, if he believes that, there's no hope for anybody, is it?
I think people sometimes need to look at the bigger picture. I think in those sort of countries, if you look at the terrorism players, black players, for example, are very, very underrepresented.
Yes.
So if you are in a predominantly white man environment, obviously there is no problem. Everything's fine here. But it's having the empathy and finding out what it's like for those players that are in the minority, how they feel and how they are treated. And a lot of experiences from those sort of countries are extremely negative. And quite simply put, players don't want to go and play there. Some do because it can be quite lucrative. But if there is another option, players will always choose another option because of the environment.
And is it important that the actual protagonists here, the players, the managers, there's an issue there, isn't there? Because there aren't that many non-white managers in the English Premier League. But if you get that right, and there's a greater diversity actually participating in the sport and maybe administering the sport, then fans will eventually have to toe the line, if you like, because there's nothing to complain about. It becomes a new normal, doesn't it?
I think that's very, very important. Growing up as a young British Asian, all the role models I had were non-Asian. That was fine because I loved Gary Lineker. He scored goals. He was a role model for me. Yeah. But when you step into the professional game, there was no Asian or no black referees, coaches, staff, managers, and that was quite scary because you do feel very much isolated. And I do think if this problem is going to change for the better, it has to come from the top as well as the bottom. We need to see representation all across the game, not just in terms of players, coaches, staff, referees, and like you said, in administration at the governing body at the top level.
Because if we compare it, I wonder if this is a football problem. Because if we think about American sport, how that grew up, the basketball game, the American football game has got as many black players as white, in fact, probably more so. And yet they didn't seem to go through that history of having this racism being exhibited by spectators or supporters of the sport. Is this a very football and a very European football problem, do you think?
I think football fans are very different to other sports, cricket, rugby, and in comparison to other sports across the country. It's very unique. There's passion. The commitment that fans show to clubs in this country is amazing. People travel across the...
More tribal than anything else?
And it is very much tribal. It's our club, this is us. And I think it's very difficult to compare, us to other countries, but there has been a transition that, for example, the Americans have made, but they had things like the Rooney Rule, which was implemented in the NFL to try and encourage more representation. So there could be a discussion that maybe we could do something like that over here, but I just think it's about giving everyone the opportunity and actually looking at clubs at every level and saying, OK, are we as diverse as we should be as a club in terms of our terraces, our management, our players? And I think clubs need to do that.
OK, and we're going to pause there and come back to talk some more in just a moment. You're watching Insight. We'll ask why there are so few Asian football players in the world's top leagues.